Arthur Morgan is an interesting guy. He's a criminal, but also honest. He's a killer, but also a liberator. He is by all metrics a bad and evil person. And yet, he is also a good man. It is impossible to talk about Arthur Morgan in any context unless you also talk about who he ran with his entire life. The Vanderlyn gang is essentially the real-life manifestation of it's fun to do bad things. The group headed up by Dutch Vanderlyn, yes, he named his gang after himself, yes, he's the most humble person ever. The gang was one of the most prolific crews ever, with them gaining enough notoriety from their crimes that they were being chased all across the country by the Pinkertons. This ragtag group of criminals is the closest thing Arthur ever had to family. Arthur Morgan spent the better part of 20 years with this crew. They taught him how to read, how to use guns, how to fight. Clearly they also taught him how to dress cause holy, these fits are crazy. Although having been the people who molded Arthur into who he was and ultimately who he became, the gang is the reason why Arthur needed to redeem himself in the first place. From the time he was 14 up until his 30s, damn, this was a man being taught how to shoot, kill, rob, and be an outlaw. It was on the road from the gang that he learned his aggression and his cruelty. Arthur's a grown man, don't get me wrong, he has agency. But when you spend your entire life with people and see them as your family, you're probably not going to go against what they tell you. That's why Arthur was robbing trains and collecting debts, despite it really sending him further down this moral hole. Because of these people, his family, who had taught him this game from the time he was a child, he didn't know anything else. Arthur is somebody who learned about right and wrong, but only ever did wrong. The gang constantly robbed, cheat, and kill, usually for money, and Arthur, having the position he had in the gang, was often the person taking the lead on all these endeavors. It's not ridiculous to say that Arthur being a bad person was an aspect of him that was exacerbated by his time with the gang. Who's to say that if Arthur never joined the gang, he wouldn't have been like a very handsome guy on YouTube making video essays or something? Why we gotta jump into crime immediately? You know that thing your parents would tell you about, oh, if your friends jumped off a cliff, would you jump with them? Arthur looked at his mom and said yes, because that's straight up Arthur's character. He is somebody who, for better or worse, will do whatever he can for his family, no matter what. And while that's a really admirable stance to take, what has his family done for him? Don't get me wrong, I love the gang, they're really dope to be around and they're dope characters, and I feel like I can trust all of them, except, you know. But the way I feel about the gang, the way you feel about the gang, doesn't change the fact that all the bad shit Arthur has done in his life was either on behalf of the gang or taught to him by them. And it took reaching the end of his life to understand that who he was, the person he was taught to be, was not the person he wanted to be. About halfway into Red Dead 2, you're walking down the streets of Saint-Denis, and Arthur just starts coughing. Like a lot. It's the kind of cough your friend gets when he takes a puff of a Juul for the first time. He continues coughing until he almost passes out, and makes his way to a doctor's office. At the doctor's office, the doctor's running tests on him, and randomly he just casually tells him,
"You got tuberculosis."
Brother, I know we're in the 1800s, but can I get like a little bit more bedside manner than, hey man, you're cooked? And I know by modern standards, we pretty much have tuberculosis dealt with because everyone gets vaccinated, but you gotta understand, late 1800s, tuberculosis was moving like prime Red Hood. Every sickness was. You could get the common cold, and motherfuckers would start writing you off. Oh, sorry for your loss. Bitch, I'm still here. So Arthur gets his prognosis, and there's some fascinating internal realizations that happen here. Chief among them is that Arthur is not a good man, but he doesn't want to die as the person he is now. He's not confident in the idea that he can become a good man, but even just pursuing goodness is better than staying the way he was. Arthur was always a person who would look after his family, but he would sell out any stranger for a quick buck. But right after his prognosis, he had a conversation with a nun, and he tells her what he's feeling, and mostly about the fact that
I'm afraid.
Afraid of death, of dying as the person he is right now, afraid of having nothing to leave behind, afraid of going to hell, which I'm gonna be honest, might be justified. But ultimately, just afraid. It's an honest statement, and for someone like Arthur who has lied so much in his life, it's probably the most honest he's ever been. So the nun tells Arthur to do a loving act. So Arthur takes the nun's advice and begins trying to rectify all the wrongs he committed. He gives some money to a widow whose husband he collected a debt from. He stops allowing Strauss to collect debts, effectively ending the loan sharking business that the gang had. He does a money spread on Tilly at a really tense moment in the game, and he also saves John. Arthur does a complete 180 from who he was at the beginning of the game. He goes from being this guy who would get into bar fights and rob trains to a sentimental, calm man with only one driving force: to do good with whatever time he had left. In the Full Metal Alchemist video, I talked a lot about what it means to be human. This is another aspect of that. Human beings have a lot of trouble with keeping time. We always think we have more of it, but in reality, you could lose your life at any moment. Arthur got tuberculosis just cause this dude coughed in his vicinity. Human beings are extremely fragile. We often think we're stronger and more durable than we are, and it's because of that we often put off doing things we know we should. How many times do you think Arthur thought to himself in between murders, is this uncool? Should I change at all? But it wasn't until Arthur was knocking on death's door that he decided to take that thought seriously and actually become someone better than who he was. And I guess the question ultimately becomes whether Arthur was somebody who died as someone better than he lived. And the answer is undeniably yes. He tried his best to rectify his wrongs and do good by the people he hurt. He stuck by his friends and guided them away from Dutch when Dutch started to go off the rails. The fact is that Arthur Morgan, despite being someone who was deeply afraid of his mortality, chose to look at himself and become someone better. He chose to redeem himself. Arthur Morgan may be the most interesting character in the entirety of the Red Dead franchise. He's somebody who is full of contradictions, and yet is probably one of the most straightforward people around. He is somebody who recognizes the fragility of life because he encountered the fragility of life, and ultimately chose to meet that fragility with kindness and nobility. And even though he had very little time left, he chose to be someone he could be proud of. Despite all the horrible things he did, which was a lot, that was not the person he was at the end of his life. And I think that's admirable. There's a lot of things you can say when it comes to Arthur, but for me personally, I'm often reminded from that quote of Skyrim where you're asked,
"What is better, to be born good or to overcome your evil nature through great effort?"
Yo! Let's see one. Wait, go. These hoes don't even get